Scribbly Gum presents The Seaside Witch, Episode 2. My first day in Rosewood Bay dawned bright and sunny. I awoke to beams of golden light glancing through the window. From my bed, I could see the tops of large fig trees and the white-capped waves of the estuary. It looked beautiful out there, but I didn't feel like getting up. It just wasn't home. Not that I was even sure where home was anymore. Mum was off on a retreat somewhere, working on her latest novel. And Dad, well, he'd checked out a long time ago. He spent his days among the sheep on his farm, and I only saw him if I went down there. He'd never recovered when Mum decided she wanted more freedom and less husband. Instead, he'd bought the farm and retreated from life. The city hadn't felt much like home either. That was the thing that was upsetting me the most. I had to keep reminding myself that my ex-boyfriend wasn't even there anymore. He was likely settling into some flat in a trendy suburb and very much enjoying his fabulous new life. Without me. No doubt he'd met some glamorous British woman on the plane and had forgotten all about me. I gritted my teeth at the thought and tried not to wish him ill. But it was hard. The last 2 weeks had been such a panicked flurry to get everything done in time that the reality of my life hadn't really had time to catch up. Now I had time to breathe. Life was looking pretty grim. Here I was, single, lonely, home free and without a real job at 32. Yeah, I was going to be a shop girl for 6 months for Great-Aunt Valerie, but that wasn't what I went to university for 6 years. The life of a shop girl wasn't why I'd racked up 6 figures of student debt. So I stayed in bed. I sobbed into my large rainbow handkerchief. I moped, and I wallowed, and I doom-scrolled on my phone. Everything just made me feel worse. My thoughts turned from morose to jagged, and I must have finally drifted back to sleep, because I awoke with a start. Something was in the room, or someone. I knew it without a shadow of a doubt. I stayed completely still as I listened. I opened my eyes a fraction, trying to see through my lashes. The room was silent, but I could feel something looking at me. I tried to picture the layout of the room. The bed, the nightstands, the chest of drawers and the window. If someone was in the room, I'd be able to see them as soon as I opened my eyes. The only weapon I had close to hand was my phone, or my rather damp and sticky rainbow handkerchief. I couldn't remember if I'd locked the front door of the shop. I stalled for a long moment, and then realised I was being ridiculous and sat up, grabbing both the phone and the handkerchief just in case. The room was empty. I looked left and right, but there was no one. But I could still feel them. I looked down. There, seated on the floor beside my bed, was an enormous, long-haired black cat with startling green eyes. It was staring at me. I sighed with relief. Penelope? The cat ignored me and set to licking one of her delicate, white-socked paws. Groaning, I got out of bed. Annabelle must be somewhere close by if the cat was back. I threw a dressing gown over my pyjamas and creaked down the stairs to the shop. Annabelle was seated behind the counter as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked up from a book she was thumbing, and a frown creased her forehead. "Well, you look like hell." "Good morning, Annabelle." "Oh, it's long past morning, girl. Why are you still in your pyjamas? It's a beautiful day." I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, and I resisted the urge to grit my teeth. "Thank you for bringing Penelope in." She stared at me for a long moment, and I shifted uncomfortably on my feet. This woman would definitely smell a lie from 10 miles away. "That's my pleasure. I'm glad to see her back in the shop, to be honest. She's been terrorizing my dogs, you know. She's a fierce one, that Penelope." I thought that maybe then she'd leave. But she just sat there, looking at me expectantly. I racked my brains. Did she want payment of some kind? Finally, reluctantly, I said, "Would you like to come up for some tea?" "Oh yes, I would, my dear." "One quick cup wouldn't be too painful." "I'm afraid I don't have any sweets to offer you, Annabelle. I haven't been to the shops yet." "Oh, never mind that, dear. I brought some tea cakes I made yesterday." She hauled a large Tupperware container filled to the brim with cakes, far more than 2 people could eat, even if one of them was decidedly in the mood for some emotional eating. "Oh, and I thought you might like to meet a few people as well. Might be best if you went and put some clothes on, though." She took a sniff in my direction. "Best have a shower as well." She ushered me up the stairs and headed to the kitchen, leaving me standing in the hall, dazed. Annabelle seemed to be insinuating that people were coming, here, to the flat, above the shop. I grabbed a towel and headed to the bathroom. When I emerged 20 minutes later, the air smelt like fresh brewed tea, and there was a murmur of conversation drifting from the kitchen. I hesitated, feeling suddenly shy. I was in no mood to meet anyone new. I almost fled back down the hall to my bedroom. But then I frowned and thought that's what the old Astrid would do. The new Astrid wasn't going to be some shrinking wallflower who was looked over at work or dumped for some job overseas. New Astrid was going to be a boss. She was going to be in charge of her own life. She wasn't going to be scared into hiding by a few women, some cakes and a pot of tea. If I wanted to be new Astrid, I had to march into that kitchen as if I owned the place and stake my claim. I straightened my back, I squared my shoulders, and proceeded to walk with purpose towards the door. I was just about to step through when I heard Annabelle's voice. "Ah, our gracious hostess is here." There was no way she could have seen me, and it was unlikely she heard me above the hum of conversation. And yet, she knew I was there. I carefully arranged my face and stepped into the room. 6 strange women sat around the kitchen table. When I say strange, yes, they were strangers to me. But they were also rather odd-looking. I'm not just saying that because they were dressed in a quaint country way, a couple of them were, but it was something else. The moment I stepped into the room, there was a hum of something. The women fell silent, but something else thronged. I could feel the hairs on the backs of my arms stand up, and there was a pressure behind my eyes. I blinked, trying to remember to be assertive. "Hello, ladies!" My tone was more rough than I intended, but they had stirred me from my day of wallowing, so they were going to get the Astrid they were going to get. I'm glad you were able to make yourselves at home in my absence. I allowed just a drop of acid to colour my voice as I looked from one woman to the next. They were certainly not shy about staring back. There was a chuckle from the kettle where Annabelle stood. "Well said, Astrid. It's almost as if Valerie was here." I shot her a glance, but pulled up a chair and sat down. Annabelle walked over with a plate stacked high with tea cakes, and I felt my stomach growl in anticipation. I'm quite certain the other 6 women heard it too. The one seated across from me, with cheeks like red apples and cornflower blue eyes, pushed a teacup and saucer across the table, smiling all the way to her eyes as she did. "It's nice to meet you, Astrid. I'm Layla. I have a flower shop on Little Bay Road, Bloomin' Thistle. Do you take milk or sugar?" I tried to picture Little Bay Road, with its row of quaint shops. I could remember a butcher, a little Vietnamese bakery, a little boutique with the sort of clothes only people on holiday actually buy, and somewhere, in the middle, a florist. I managed a small smile. "Just a dash of milk, please. No sugar, thanks, Layla." One by one, the women around the table introduced themselves, as I sipped on my tea and munched on Annabelle's tea cakes. They were incredible. Moist, buttery, deliciously flavoured with poppy seed and apple. I think given enough time, and enough tea, I could have devoured the entire plate all by myself. The ladies before me were more of a challenge. Sophia had eyes like rusted nails, full lips that covered a set of bone-white teeth, and smooth skin the colour of toasted caramel. Her thick dark curls framed the sides of her face and bounced gently as she talked, softening her rather severe features. She was a herbalist and energy healer with a home practice somewhere in the east of town, right down near the tractor mechanics, wherever that was. Sunhee was my age, or perhaps a little younger. She looked at me a bit shyly as she spoke. She was an accountant by training, but was currently taking leave from work to bring up her 2 small boys, and had developed a keen interest in the gentle crafts over the past 2 years. In fact, she was considering running workshops to teach sewing, weaving, knitting and crocheting, because she couldn't stomach the thought of returning to the office and staring at a computer screen and other people's fiscal accidents all day. Her true passion was gardening, though. She supplied many of the flowers for Sophia's store in town. She smiled at me when she said she had been gifted with a green palm. I'd always thought the saying was a green thumb, but perhaps the folks in Rosewood Bay had tweaked the saying? She was beautiful, in an understated way. She had fine dark eyes, lovely arched eyebrows and cheekbones set high in her face. Her voice was soft, but there was a quiet confidence there. Eveline was older than my Great-Aunt Valerie. Her short white hair hugged her face in waves. Her eyes were somewhat milky, and there were lines crisscrossing her face in all directions. Smile lines, frown lines, crow's feet. The evidence of her joys and sorrows were etched right there on her face. I noticed a slight tremor in her fingers as she reached for her cup of tea. It took her a moment to find it. Yes, her eyes were not what they once had been. When Eveline spoke, her voice was slow and ponderous. She took long pauses between her sentences, as if searching for the words. But gradually she told her story. Eveline had been a schoolteacher, back when there were only a handful of children living in Rosewood Bay. She had taught at the local church school, 23 children, ranging in age from 5 to 13, all in the one classroom. As with everyone in town back in those days, She had had a second profession as a midwife, and had personally delivered many of the children that she taught. She had married 4 times, a farmer, an auctioneer, a tailor, and a butcher, and had outlived all of them. She had never had children, but had a sister and 2 brothers who could almost fill a school bus with all their children and grandchildren. Her eyes never quite focused on my face, but somehow I knew she could see me. Perhaps not my nose or the shape of my lips, but something more true than just the way I looked. Joyce was quite spiky and abrupt in her manner of speaking. Perhaps it came from having 3 rambunctious teenagers and very little time for herself, or the fact she was a single parent, as her no-good husband had run off with the nail salon lady 3 years prior. She was the local realtor, and clearly had a penchant for pastel blazers, chunky jewellery, and sensible but colourful slacks. She was not the sort of woman I would usually associate with, at least not willingly. I could imagine her being the one that remembered all the birthdays, but in a rather brutish way that made you rather wish she hadn't. I wondered briefly what she might have been like, if life had been just a little bit kinder to her. She read tarot whenever there was a local market or street fair. Tarot, palms, tea leaves, whatever charlatan nonsense the general public were willing to pay for. I had to rebuff her offers to look for a longer-term rental multiple times, though, and by the time she'd said her piece, I was relieved that she no longer had the floor. It was rather more attention than I wanted. Ilse was quiet. In fact, she spoke very little the entire time. She had big brown eyes that were soft, but also sad, a shock of long curly hair that fell to her shoulder blades, and tortoiseshell glasses that steamed up slightly as she sipped her tea. She owned a second-hand bookstore somewhere close to the pizza parlour, and with a shy smile invited me to drop by any time I needed something new to read. She was some sort of expert on magical animals and the history of spells or something like that. So probably some sort of myth researcher. Really, it sounded like she'd read one too many fairy tales and started to believe they were factual. It was only when she stood up to leave that I realised how much taller she was than all the other women there. Lastly, Annabelle spoke. A little about the farm she ran with her husband Harry, her twin daughters, Sadie and Agnes, and the special community that existed in Rosewood Bay. Then she said something that I'm pretty sure left me with my mouth hanging wide open. She said she was sure that Valerie had told me, but the women seated around my great-aunt's kitchen table were in fact her coven, as in a coven of witches. Apparently, Great-Aunt Valerie was also a witch, and she was not in fact on a round-the-world cruise at all, but was researching ley lines in the far reaches of Argentina. Annabelle continued that she was sure I was probably missing my own coven, and that they would be very pleased if I would consider joining theirs, as being one short in a coven was obviously not ideal. So would I like to join? When Annabelle finished speaking, I had 7 sets of eyes look expectantly over at me, as if everything that had been said was perfectly sane, and there was a simple yes or no answer. I closed my mouth with a click. They couldn't be serious, could they? I was hoping one of them would bring out a hidden camera or suddenly laugh at the joke, but as I scanned each one of the 7 faces in front of me, they all looked curious but grave. There was no one kicking each other under the table or slyly winking at each other. So, they were serious then. During my time as a reporter, I'd met some pretty delusional characters, so I wasn't entirely unused to feeling completely out of depth. I'd found that often in these situations, if your mind went blank, then the best thing you could do was buy yourself some time to come up with a sensible response. I certainly needed to process this insanity, but that wasn't going to get these 7 strange women to stop staring at me. So rather than engaging directly with the most troubling statements they had made, I gave a quick spiel about being Valerie's great-niece and visiting in summers past. A little bit about taking a break from journalism to help Valerie while she was away. I didn't mention the fact that it was because I was sacked, dumped, and more or less kicked out of my home. But somehow, I think they all knew anyway from the sympathetic nods I was getting. Finally, I thanked them for their invitation to join the coven. I still can't believe they actually called it a coven, and I really don't think they were joking. But politely and firmly declined. I made no mention of the fact that I wasn't already in a coven of my own, or that I wasn't a witch and had never exhibited even the slightest hint of magical talent, even when under extreme duress. Then I looked pointedly at the door, very eager for them all to leave. No one tried to persuade me or talk me around. They simply nodded, finished their cups of tea, and got up to go. As the bell on the shop door finally stopped tinkling, I stayed seated at the table. My head was buzzing with all the new information, most of which I was fairly determined to forget. But the electric feeling, the one that had made the hairs on my arms stand on end, that was gone. It was strange. The kitchen felt sort of empty without it, as if a balloon had been taut and full of air, and now the air was gone, and the rubber casing was distended from the effort.